But anyhow, now as that month progresses, General Swider, and this is a little emotional for me because he decides that they're going to charge that hill. I'm saying bomb the shit out of it and make it a hole in the ground, but don't charge it. Number one, they've got the advantage of location. They've been there. They're dug in. And guys, we're going after them. You know, don't give me this crap about their Vietnamese. Let me tell you, these are good soldiers. We lost, over 400 people in that month. It's liquid passion. It's not tears. But two guys made it to the top.
Tom Coffey watched American soldiers get stacked up like cordwood at the base of Hill 875 at Dak To, Vietnam, because a general wanted to charge a hill that Tom had already told them they shouldn't charge. He was a second lieutenant, the most knowledgeable intelligence officer at that firebase, the man who knew exactly what was dug into that hill and exactly how many North Vietnamese regulars were waiting up there. And he was a second lieutenant, so they thanked him for his input and charged the hill anyway. And the men who paid for that decision weren't the ones who made it. That's Tom Coffey's story. That's what happened at Dak To in November of 1967, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, before we get into all of it, if you're new here, this channel is about preserving these stories straight from the people who lived them. Tom Coffey sat down and told this in his own words, and our job is to make sure that voice doesn't get lost. We post these regularly. If that matters to you, go ahead and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means this kind of history keeps reaching people who care about it. So let's start at the beginning, because you can't really understand what Tom Coffey did at Dak To without understanding where he came from first. Tom grew up in Kentucky, born in Louisville, raised in Somerset, right there in the central southern part of the state on Lake Cumberland. He's the first to tell you it was a great way to grow up. Mother, dad, older sister Joanne, and a brother named Shelby Jr., who passed away when Tom was only 5 years old, a brain tumor. So, loss wasn't a stranger to that family. His father had been in ROTC at Georgia Tech, deeply patriotic, managed a powder mill for the military during World War II rather than serving directly. Something he had complicated feelings about for the rest of his life, but also something he was proud of, because he knew what he was contributing. Tom grew up in that environment. Service was just what you did. It was expected. It was respected. Tom went to Eastern Kentucky University, and he's quick to point out that Eastern Kentucky University is not actually in Eastern Kentucky. It's right outside Lexington in the Bluegrass, beautiful area of the state. While he was there, Tom enrolled in ROTC as a freshman and was a member of the Pershing Rifles, which is a precision drill team. Almost like a fraternity, he says, but with a lot more discipline. He graduated in 1965 with a degree in political science and English, and his first job out of school was with the Collegiate Council for the United Nations in New York. He'd been active in Model United Nations, and his background suited it. He was there from around July of '65 until about March of '66, when a draft notice showed up. And here's the thing. Tom accepted it with open arms. He went straight to an Army recruiter. The recruiter apparently had a quota to fill that month, gave Tom a little test, came back out and shook his hand, and Tom was on his way toward officer candidate school. He went through basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, in June of 1966, and Tom was determined to succeed. Part of it was his own competitive nature. Part of it, he'll tell you honestly, was for his family. They'd already lost one son, and Tom felt like however he did reflected back on them too. He finished second in his basic training class, which in the Army technically means there's only a first. But Tom says if two people are vying for the top spot and there's a runoff, he lost that runoff, so second it is. The guy who beat him was a prior service soldier who'd been in before and was coming back in. Tom shook his hand. Advanced infantry training came next, still at Fort Jackson so he didn't have to move. And in AIT he was number 1. He worked hard. He tried harder than almost anyone there. And it showed. From there, Tom went to Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, the infantry school, where they started with 220 candidates and graduated exactly 110. When you're living that close together through that kind of pressure, through all that training, you get to know each other in a real way. Tom still talks about those guys, Bob Marshall from Texas, Jack Wetzel, who played guitar like you wouldn't believe, Mike Tucker, who would become one of his closest friends for the rest of his life. There was even a British volunteer in Tom's OCS class, a guy named Tony, who had no obligation to serve in the American military but volunteered anyway, because that's the kind of man he was. They lost Tony in Vietnam. That one stayed with Tom. At OCS, Tom figured out what he wanted to do. Intelligence work was at the top of his dream sheet, and somehow he got it. Not everyone gets their first choice. Tom did. He received an infantry commission with an automatic branch transfer into military intelligence, went through 8 weeks of intel school at Fort Holabird in Maryland, and then got orders to Vietnam. But they didn't send him directly. First, he went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which he calls probably his favorite post. Big, active, the 82nd Airborne stationed there, Pope Air Force Base right alongside it. Tom was assigned to lead an augmentation team, 12 men total with Tom as the lieutenant, all enlisted except him. He remembers them clearly, still, and he remembers looking around at their faces on the plane heading out and knowing that none of them, including him, really knew what they were getting into. They flew on a C-141, big Air Force transport, sitting backwards the whole way like military passengers always do, refueled in Hawaii, on the tarmac, didn't even really get to see anything, bought an American Coke and that was it. Stopped at Wake Island, which had its own significant history from World War II. Stopped at Okinawa. And then they landed at Pleiku Air Base in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam, and Tom says he still remembers the feeling when they stepped off that plane. The dirt, the remnants of the monsoon, the smell, the disorganization. His first real impression of Vietnam was that it was just not organized the way you'd expect. Eventually, the Army sorted things out and got Tom assigned to Camp Inari, the headquarters of the 4th Infantry Division. The area of operation for the 4th covered Pleiku Province, Darlak to the south, and Kon Tum to the north. And that last one, Kon Tum, is where Tom Coffey was sent. The city of Kon Tum itself, he says, was actually quite lovely. The French nuns and priests had been there and built a nice church. It was a genuine little village. But Tom wasn't spending much time in the city. His assignment was the outlying Firebase at Dak To, roughly 30 miles out from Kon Tum, give or take, deep in the mountains and the triple canopy jungle near the tri-border area where Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia all come together. Dak To was nothing but a firebase. No city, no village, nothing around it except mountains and dense jungle and some Montagnard tribesmen, the tribal people of the highlands, who Tom speaks of with genuine respect and sadness. He says they were exploited by both sides, the Americans and the NVA, and they just wanted to live in their villages and be left alone. That's not what happened to them, unfortunately. What made the Dak To fire base unique, operationally, was that it had a hand-built runway that could actually land a C-130 Hercules. Now, a C-130, Tom describes it as the Air Force's grunt. It's slow, it's big, it can carry stuff and land on something not much bigger than a football field. So they could get heavy equipment in and out, including the 175mm artillery guns they had positioned up there. 2 of those. The 175 is the largest gun there is. It'll fire 30 clicks, 30 kilometers, and its shells are something else. The Army never wants to lose one to the enemy, but those guns could do serious work. The C-130s were constantly resupplying them. That was the Firebase at Dak To. That was where Tom Coffey was sent to be the intelligence officer. And at division headquarters back at Camp Inari, Tom's closest friend, Mike Tucker, who always reminded Tom that Mike had 2 months' seniority of rank on him, which Tom found endlessly amusing given they were both second lieutenants, Mike was heading up what the Army calls Order of Battle. That means studying enemy units, their capabilities, their strengths and weaknesses, everything about the forces operating in the area. Tom's job was specifically Khantoum Province. He was becoming expert on the terrain, the enemy units, the patterns of activity. He was, as he puts it, fighting the war with a grease pencil on a big map for a while, posting small skirmishes and tracking movement. And then things started to change. The intelligence picture that Tom was building through the summer and into the fall of 1967 was clear, and it was not good. The North Vietnamese Army, not the Viet Cong but North Vietnamese regulars, the NVA, had been massing across the border in Cambodia. Specifically, Tom knew it was the 1st NVA Division with 2 of their best regiments, the 24th and the 174th. Now, a regiment in the NVA structure is roughly comparable to a brigade in the American Army. It's a significant formation. They would travel south through Laos, which was a relatively undeveloped country that provided cover, and then slip into Cambodia right there at the corner where all 3 borders meet, close enough that Tom says you could hit it with a slingshot from Dak To. And in Cambodia, the Americans weren't supposed to fire on them. So the NVA could regroup there, retrain, refit, and prepare. And Tom Coffey knew they were there. He knew exactly which units they were. He knew their target was Dak To. Their goal was to overrun a major American firebase. It was significant enough and close enough, and the buildup was big enough that there was no mistaking what was coming. Tom was briefing this up the chain of command. He says the closer you get to actual combat, rank takes a secondary position when someone is genuinely the expert on something. Commanders want to hear from the person who knows, whatever their rank is. Tom was that person. He was articulate, he knew his material, and he says he'd like to think he was well respected in that brigade. There was a guy named Bud, a Kentucky man himself, who headed up the intelligence unit at the brigade level, imagery people, POW interrogators. All of it reported up to Bud. Good man. But Tom had knowledge from the division level that Bud didn't have access to. Tom knew what was building in Cambodia. Colonel Jackson, the full colonel commanding the brigade, Tom speaks of him with genuine respect to this day. He was a soldier. Tom may not say he liked him in a personal sense, but he respected how the man carried himself and handled his people. And Colonel Jackson and the people around him knew what Tom's assessment was. They knew what was coming. The Battle of Dak To began in early November of 1967. Tom says they were hit every day for 23 straight days. Not just probing, consistent, deliberate fire on their perimeter, mortar fire, what the Army calls interdiction. There was a Dak Poko River that somewhat surrounded the firebase, and Tom knew that if the NVA ever got across that river in force, it would have been a very different story he'd be telling today. They didn't get that far, but they were there every day for 23 days. Now across those hills to the west of the Firebase, Tom describes it like a clock face, with Dak To at the center and fire bases positioned out at 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock to try to stop the NVA's advance. The 1st Brigade of the 4th Infantry Division had units deployed, but it became clear quickly that it wasn't enough for what was coming. The situation went all the way up to General Westmoreland's headquarters, and the decision came down to send the 173rd Airborne Brigade up to support. The 173rd, sometimes called the Sky Soldiers, was a full brigade-strength unit with a solid history. Tom says that history was about to change. They were brought up and positioned out on those hills, and one of the most significant positions, the one that would define the entire campaign in terms of what it cost, was Hill 875. Hill 875, 875 meters of elevation. Tom describes the shape of it as kind of like a loading ramp. It would gradually slope upward and then just drop off sharply near the top, like a ramp a truck could back up to be loaded. And it was dense. Triple canopy jungle, thick, wet, everything negative you can imagine. Bugs, cold at night, hot in the day, visibility almost nothing. And the NVA's 174th Regiment was dug into that hill. Dug in deep. They had built an elaborate network of bunkers and tunnels. Tom says they were ingenious. The tunnels they constructed were essentially underground communities. They had their own hospitals down there, interlocking fields of fire across every approach. They had the high ground, and they had time to prepare, and they used both. Tom Coffey knew this. He knew exactly what was on that hill. So when the decision came down from General Swatter, and Tom says his name with a certain weight, that they were going to charge Hill 875, Tom Coffey spoke up. He made his position clear. He said, bomb it. Bomb the hell out of it. Make it a hole in the ground. Don't charge it. They've got the advantage of location. They're dug in. They've had time to prepare. And these are not soldiers to be underestimated. Tom is emphatic about this. He wants everyone to know that the NVA were good soldiers. Tough, well-trained, disciplined. Dismissing them would have been a fatal mistake. And in some ways, that dismissal did contribute to what happened. General Swatter, as Tom tells it, had some of that old-fashioned gung-ho in him. This is a hill, and we're going to take it. Tom was a second lieutenant. He'd given his assessment as clearly and directly as he could. He was overruled. The assault would go forward. If this story is hitting you the way it's hitting me just going through it, I want to say, this is exactly the kind of history we try to keep alive here. Real accounts, real people, real cost. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, this is a good moment to do it. It means more of these stories find the people who need to hear them. It's free, and it matters. On the 19th of November, 1967, American paratroopers from the 173rd Airborne moved toward Hill 875. And what happened on that hill is the kind of thing that doesn't translate cleanly into words. But Tom tries. The NVA let them come partway up before opening up with everything they had. The Americans were hit from multiple directions in dense jungle. Units got separated. Casualties mounted fast. The soldiers of the 173rd fought with everything they had. Tom never questions their courage for a single second. But courage doesn't overcome a well-prepared enemy with the high ground and interlocking fields of fire when you're climbing uphill through jungle. They were taking catastrophic losses. At the base of the hill, the Army brought in what Tom calls a kit, basically a bunch of chainsaws and equipment, to cut out a command post, a CP, in the jungle. They needed a place to bring the wounded, to coordinate what was going on, to get helicopters in and out. And Tom was there, all over that area, not as a combat troop, but as the intelligence officer who knew the ground better than almost anyone. He watched the helicopter pilots come in to evacuate the wounded and the dead, going into places they had no business landing, doing it anyway. And Tom says to this day, he takes his hat off to every one of those pilots. People are walking today because of what those men did, and then they ran out of body bags. Tom pauses when he talks about this, even now, decades later. He says it's a sight no one in the world should ever see. When you see dead American soldiers stacked up like cordwood and they're not in bags, he says he can still see it right now. He will never forget it. That's the reality of what happened at the base of Hill 875 on those November days. And in the middle of all that chaos, Tom says pandemonium doesn't quite cover it, but it's the closest word. The only thing keeping anyone going was their training. Do what you're trained to do. Keep your head down. Keep moving. And then came the moment that Tom Coffey has carried for the rest of his life. In the military, when an aircraft is carrying ordnance, bombs, and for whatever reason can't reach its assigned target, the pilots don't want to land with that ordnance still on the plane. So a pilot called in and said he had a bomb and needed a target. Well, the top of Hill 875 was a target. Tom still asks himself today, out loud, why the hell they hadn't done that from the beginning, rather than sending men up the hill on foot. But there was a bomb, and there was a pilot, and now the question was how to bring it in. Tom was on the radio. He was talking with the air officer, the officer responsible for coordinating air assets. And Tom was very clear. The plane has got to go north to south. It cannot go east to west. Because if it goes east to west, it risks hitting the command post at the base of the hill. North to south. He said it over and over. North to south. North to south. And then a friendly bomb hit that command post and killed 44 people. Tom says he's living it. It's a day in hell. Because you don't want to be living it. You don't want to see it. You don't want this to be real. His instructions were not followed. Whether the communication broke down somewhere in the chain, whether someone overrode it, whether the approach was simply wrong, Tom doesn't know exactly what went wrong at every step. He just knows what he said, and he knows what happened. Among those killed when that bomb hit was Father Charles Waters, the chaplain. Major Waters, Tom calls him Major Waters, was the chaplain for the 173rd Airborne. Before the bomb fell, Father Waters had been doing something that defies easy description. He'd gone out to that hill unarmed. He'd had to argue his way out there. He went to the colonel first and was told no, then went to General Swatter and finally convinced them that this was his job, to be with the wounded, to try to comfort the men who were dying. And once he was out there, Father Waters did exactly that. He moved through the battle going to wounded men and dragging them to safety, over and over. He was hit himself and kept going. He administered last rites to the dying. He refused to stop while any of his soldiers needed him. And then the bomb fell. Father Charles Waters was killed in that friendly firebombing. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for what he did on Hill 875. They gave the medal to his family, because the man himself was gone. Tom's voice changes when he talks about Major Waters. He says, at the end of his account, that he wrote about Waters afterward, that Major Waters could escort a lot of good people to heaven. That's how Tom thinks about him, and that's probably right. After brutal day, Hill 875 was finally secured on November 23, 1967. Thanksgiving Day. The surviving paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne reached the crest of that hill on Thanksgiving Day. What they found when they got there, the elaborate NVA fortifications, the tunnels, the evidence of how thoroughly prepared the enemy had been, confirmed everything Tom Coffey had been saying. The NVA had taken what they came to take from the battle and then slipped away. Across the entire Dak To campaign, the American losses were staggering. Tom puts it plainly. They lost well over 400 people in that month. His voice catches when he says it, just slightly, but it catches. He says it's liquid passion, not tears. But you can hear what it costs him to say it out loud even now. There is a book about the 173rd at Dak To. Edward Murphy wrote it, called Dak To, America's Sky Soldiers. Tom Coffey called Murphy on the phone one day after it came out because Tom had a problem with it. The book was focused almost entirely on the 173rd and their assault, without fully accounting for the supporting role of the 4th Infantry Division's brigade, the unit Tom was part of, the unit that had been tracking this battle coming for months before the 173rd ever arrived. Tom felt the full picture wasn't in there, but the book does document what happened on Hill 875, and it's a serious account of a serious battle. Tom knows the facts in that book because he lived them. After Dak To, after the battle wound down and Tom eventually got some R&R, he went to Fort de Roos to meet his then-wife, arriving at about 1 in the morning. He knocked on the door, she came out, hugged him, and the first thing she said was that he needed to take a shower. Tom still laughs about it. The red dirt of Vietnam had gotten into his skin. It's much like Kentucky's red dirt, he says, and he was carrying it all the way home. But it was wonderful. He was there. His buddy, Mike Tucker, the man who'd been trying to get himself sent up to Dak To before Tom ended up going instead, got absolutely waxed on New Year's Eve. Tom tells this story with real affection. Mike was not a big drinker, and somehow on New Year's Eve he got completely drunk and fell into a latrine in the dark, walking across the base camp at night. Tom thought he was going to kill himself, but he didn't, and they laughed about it. And Tom says you had to laugh every now and then with each other out there. If you didn't, you'd go crazy. Mike Tucker is still one of Tom's closest friends to this day. They've known each other over 50 years. And then, back at division headquarters at Camp Inari, Tom got back into his intelligence role, and what he started seeing in the weeks after Dak To was deeply disturbing. The intel picture was showing a massive buildup, not in one area, everywhere. He was briefing it up the chain, and people weren't believing him. Nobody thought the NVA and the Viet Cong could coordinate a simultaneous attack on every major installation in the country. It seemed too large, too complex, too ambitious. Tom was seeing it in the data and saying, "This is real, this is coming," and nobody quite believed it could be as big as it looked. Then, at midnight on January 31st, 1968, Tet, the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, everything lit up at once. Tom was at the DTOC, the Division Tactical Operations Center, and he says, at 10 o'clock that night it was the quietest it had ever been, scary quiet, and then at midnight all hell broke loose everywhere simultaneously, the Tet offensive. Tom was immediately put back on a chopper to Dak To, which he notes with some wry humor was kind of silly, because Dak To Firebase wasn't really what the NVA was after during Tet. It got some fire, but nothing significant. He was back at division not long after. But the scale of what was happening across the entire country was almost impossible to manage. Every unit had 14 things to do at once, and couldn't do any of them properly. Pandemonium everywhere. The NVA and VC were beaten back eventually, most places within weeks, and they suffered devastating losses in the process. But Tom says they proved their point. They proved that American forces were vulnerable, that they were in some ways sitting ducks, that the coordination between NVA and VC could be executed at a scale that no one in the American command had fully believed possible. Tom says military historians will be studying the tactical coordination of the Tet Offensive for generations. He's probably right. At one point during this period, Tom was tasked to brief General Creighton Abrams, who was coming in as Westmoreland's successor, one of the most respected soldiers in American history, a man who'd commanded armor in World War II and had a reputation as a serious, pointed, demanding commander. On the very day Tom was supposed to brief General Abrams, Tom was promoted to first lieutenant. In the field in Vietnam, a promotion basically meant someone took a magic marker and painted your insignia black on your fatigues. That was it. Tom cleaned himself up as best he could, walked over to headquarters, ran into Abrams' son, who was actually serving in the 4th Infantry Division himself, and Abrams' son told him his dad was a bear on briefers. Tom says he did not need to hear that right then. But the briefing went well. The general asked sharp, pointed questions. Tom answered them. General Abrams told him there was a great future ahead of him in the Army. Tom liked the man. Tom eventually rotated back to the States, and the feeling of coming home to a country that seemed to have no idea what was happening in Vietnam was one he couldn't shake. Don't these people know what's going on over there? He remembers thinking. But he had a new assignment at Fort Bragg, working in an intelligence brigade, which was actually a solid post. He used his skills, stayed in the world he'd trained for, and kept moving. The decision to leave the Army came eventually, and then a friend from OCS, Bob Marshall, that funny Texan Tom still talks about with affection, connected him with an opportunity working for Ross Perot at Electronic Data Systems in Dallas, EDS. Tom was a political science guy, not a tech guy, and he told his friend as much. His friend told him to just do the interview anyway. He did. They offered him a job as a corporate recruiter, and that was how Tom Coffey spent 5 years helping build one of the most innovative technology companies in America during that era. Perot called Tom's group of veteran recruiters the Wild Bunch. At one point, there were 40-some of them, all going out and building the company, person by person. Tom still laughs about it. After 5 years with EDS, he went out on his own into financial services, building a business in Kentucky and Tennessee that eventually had 5 offices. Lincoln National, insurance and financial services, broker-dealer work, stocks, bonds, all of it. And Tom is the first to say that the skills he learned in the Army translated directly. Recruiting, building an organization, leadership, how you treat people. You lead by example. You create the environment. He got to know prominent people all over Louisville, served on the board at Jewish Hospital there, built a good life by the measure of any reasonable person. And then a friend named Ron Ray, a Marine, an attorney in Louisville, a full colonel in the reserves, came to Tom with an idea. Kentucky had lost 1,070 men killed in Vietnam. Ron wanted to build a memorial in Frankfurt. He needed help. He had a small group of dedicated veterans already. Tom came to a meeting. Ron told him there was a price of admission, and everyone at the table wrote a check for $1,000 to the Kentucky Vietnam Veterans Memorial Committee. Tom wrote his. What they built is something unlike any other war memorial in the country. The architect was a vet himself, a man named Helm Roberts from Lexington, Kentucky. And what Roberts designed was a giant sundial set in a beautifully constructed plaza in Frankfurt, looking down over the Kentucky River toward the state capital. The names of every Kentuckian who died in Vietnam are inscribed in the stone of that plaza, in the order of their deaths, starting from the left and moving to the right. And the sundial is engineered so that on the anniversary of each person's death, the shadow of the 16-foot gnomon, the arm of the sundial, falls precisely on that name. Tom says they didn't even know if it was going to work when they built it. They were a bunch of grunts, he says. What did they know about architecture and how the sun moves? But Helm Roberts had the charts, showed them the math, and they trusted it. And the darn thing works. You go on a sunny day and the shadow falls exactly where it's supposed to fall. Families come and stand in that shadow on the anniversary of their son's death, or their husband's, or their father's. And there are gaps between the stone panels. Tom says they were there for drainage purposes. But what they became was something nobody anticipated. Loved ones fill them with flowers, with mementos, with things that meant something. Tom says the Library and Archives of Kentucky comes and collects these things every single day and keeps them. Because someone loved someone, and that's what matters. The construction workers who built the memorial flew a POW flag on the site every single day while they worked. When protesters were rumored to be coming, the job superintendent essentially invited them to come ahead. They didn't show up. Hell's Angels have visited that memorial, Tom says, with absolute and unqualified respect. Nobody protests that memorial. You just can't. After it was complete, the Commonwealth of Kentucky tried to take it back over, and Tom's group told them no. The state threatened to sue the Vietnam Veterans Committee. Tom says he told them, "Let me make sure I understand this. The Commonwealth of Kentucky is going to sue the Vietnam Veterans Committee?" That was the end of that conversation. The veterans still hold the memorial today. They have more money in the account now than it took to raise the whole thing. Old ladies groups come and tend the flowers for nothing. It's sacred land, Tom says, and you can hear in his voice that he means it. Before we get to the very end of this story, I want to say something to anyone who's stayed all the way through this. Thank you. Genuinely. These are long stories because the men behind them lived full, complicated lives that deserve more than a headline. If you found something worth keeping in what Tom Coffey shared here, please pass it along. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Share it with someone who'd care about it. That's how this history survives. Tom Coffey was also deeply active at Eastern Kentucky University for over 20 years, serving on the foundation board not for recognition, but because he cared about the school. He's proud of what Eastern has built, an aviation program, a risk management and insurance degree program in the College of Business, programs that produce graduates who have their pick of jobs the moment they walk out. In 2010, the president of the university at the time, a classmate of Tom's named Doug, who'd also served in the military, but not in Vietnam. He likes to tease Tom that he was stationed in Texas, and Texas never got invaded once. Called Tom and told him the Board of Regents had nominated him for an honorary doctorate. Tom is proud of that, in a particular way. It came partly because of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and because of everything that work represented about how he'd chosen to live his life after the war. Tom Coffey came back from Vietnam with red dirt still in his skin, with images behind his eyes that never fully left. American soldiers stacked at the base of a hill because a general wanted to charge instead of bomb. A chaplain dying in a friendly fire explosion that Tom had tried to prevent. 44 people killed in a moment that didn't have to happen. He came back to a country that was mostly going about its business, not quite registering what the men over there were going through. He came back and built something, a business, a memorial, a life. He got some help from the VA eventually. He's the first to say it, and he praises those people for what they helped him through. There were things he carried that he couldn't carry alone, and he found the help he needed. That took its own kind of courage. The Kentucky Vietnam Veterans Memorial stands in Frankfurt today. That sundial, and those names, and those gaps filled with flowers from people who have never stopped grieving. Every single name on that plaza is a real person. Every shadow that falls on a particular day is falling for someone specific, marking the anniversary of a life that ended in a place called Vietnam. Tom Coffey helped build that, and before he built it, he was a 20-something second lieutenant standing at a fire base in the Central Highlands, looking at an intelligence picture that was perfectly clear to him, saying, "Don't charge that hill," and being overruled. He watched what came after. He watched Father Charles Waters go out unarmed into the fire to bring wounded men back, over and over, until the bomb fell. He watched soldiers stacked like cordwood. He lived it, and he came home and he built something that says, "We see you. We know what happened. We haven't forgotten." That's Tom Coffey. That's what he did and what he chose to do with the time he had after. The men on Hill 875 who didn't come home deserved better decisions made on their behalf. Tom knew that then, and he knows it now. He's been carrying it for decades, not with bitterness, but with the kind of gravity that only comes from having really been there and really understood what it cost. That gravity is its own kind of tribute, and so is the sundial in Frankfurt, and so is this story, told as straight and as true as we can tell it. Because if we don't say these names, nobody will. And Tom Coffey, and Father Charles Waters, and every soldier who climbed that hill in November of 1967. They deserve more than silence.